They laughed when the human instructor asked them to sit still and breathe. 32 alien cadets from 6 military species had crossed asteroid battlefields, vacuum drills, and neural endurance trials, yet all of them smirked when Lieutenant Mara Levin dimmed the training chamber lights and said the first lesson from Earth required no weapons at all. 3 minutes later, 2 cadets were on the floor. One had lost consciousness, and the Academy medical alarm was overriding the walls, while Mara kept breathing as if nothing unusual had happened. The Interstellar Tactical Academy had built Chamber 7 for humiliation. That was not its official designation, of course. Officially, it was a cross-species adaptive conditioning environment designed to expose cadets to unfamiliar combat doctrines under controlled pressure. But every species knew what happened inside that circular black room. Someone entered confident, and someone left understanding that another civilization possessed a method they had never imagined. The chamber walls were matte obsidian, layered with reactive pressure sensors and atmospheric modulators capable of simulating gravity shifts, toxic density, battlefield oxygen deprivation, and neural stress frequencies. Overhead lights adjusted automatically to biological comfort ranges, though no one in the room felt comfortable when Lieutenant Mara Levin entered, carrying nothing except a small tablet and a steel timer. No armor, no sidearm, no helmet. That alone triggered amusement. Cadet Ress of the Varnick line leaned toward the cadet beside him, his plated jaw clicking softly. Did they assign us a medical assistant? The nearest Keth observer produced a short pulse of laughter through his neck vents. Even 2 instructors standing behind the observation glass exchanged glances. Human officers usually arrived carrying data projections, field simulations, tactical boards. This one looked like she had come to supervise breathing exercises in a school for children. Mara placed the timer at the center of the floor. She did not react to the laughter. That, more than anything, caused the room to quiet slightly, because experienced instructors usually answered mockery immediately. She simply looked around the chamber as if memorizing each face. 32 cadets, 6 species, average age equivalent 22 Earth years. Every one of them trained for battlefield command. Every one of them now visibly underestimating her. Today, she said calmly, we begin with respiratory discipline. The laughter returned, louder now. Cadet Torvak, a broad-shouldered Duran, whose species could survive low atmosphere impact for nearly 12 minutes, raised one hand with exaggerated politeness. Permission to ask whether the Earth military has run out of enemies. Several cadets laughed openly. Mara nodded once. Permission granted. Torvak folded his arms. Breathing is involuntary. Yes, Mara said. So this lesson is automatic. For your species, perhaps. Another ripple of amusement. Torvak smiled, encouraged by the audience. For humans, too, unless your academy forgot basic biology. Mara stepped closer to him, still calm, still almost quiet. Tell me, Cadet Torvak, during your endurance sprint yesterday, when atmospheric resistance increased 22%, why did your heart rate spike beyond your predicted threshold? Torvak's smile weakened slightly. That was physical load, and your breathing changed, obviously, without control. Torvak hesitated. Mara nodded as if he had already answered. That hesitation is why you are here. She tapped the tablet. The chamber lights dimmed. Atmospheric pressure shifted by barely measurable degrees. No alarm sounded, no warning tone, just a subtle heaviness in the room. Sit. Some cadets remained standing a moment longer than necessary, unwilling to obey too quickly. Then they lowered themselves in uneven circles across the chamber floor. Ress still smirked. The Keth cadet nearest the rear wall stretched his neck vents dramatically, as though mocking meditation. Mara stood in the center. Back straight. A few complied lazily. Shoulders loose. More laughter. Tongue relaxed. Now several cadets openly exchanged glances. The absurdity to them was complete. One Varnick cadet whispered loudly enough to be heard, "This is why humans lose ships and write poetry about it." Even behind the observation glass, one senior instructor nearly smiled. Mara pressed the timer. 3 minutes appeared in white digits. Breathe in through the nose for 4 counts, she said. Nobody moved seriously. Hold for 4. Torvak deliberately exaggerated a theatrical inhale. Release for 4. Several cadets copied him mockingly. Repeat. The first cycle was chaos. Wrong timing. Intentional exaggeration. Suppressed laughter. Clicks, vents, hissing, throat sounds from species with entirely different respiratory anatomies. But Mara continued counting as if every one of them were obeying perfectly. 1, 2, 3, 4, then again. By the 4th cycle, the room began changing, not visibly, not dramatically, but enough for the cadets closest to discipline to notice something unfamiliar. The chamber atmosphere had subtly shifted oxygen density by less than 2%, a harmless change for trained bodies, unless breathing rhythm became inefficient, which Mara knew. Alien cadets almost never monitored consciously. Torvak frowned first, very slight. Rest blinked twice and adjusted posture. The Keth cadet near the rear wall stopped smiling. Mara kept counting, perfectly steady, no emotion, no explanation. Outside the chamber, the senior instructor behind the glass leaned toward the environmental display, and for the first time, his expression changed, because the human had not asked permission to modify atmosphere. Yet Chamber 7 had accepted her preset automatically, meaning command had authorized this lesson far above academy level. Inside the room, Mara reached the 7th cycle. Again, she said softly. This time, nobody laughed. By the 8th cycle, the silence inside Chamber 7 had changed texture. It was no longer the silence of cadets pretending discipline while waiting for the joke to reveal itself. It had become the silence of bodies, beginning to detect that something invisible was no longer fully under control. Cadet Ress shifted first. A small movement. One plated hand pressed briefly against the floor. His species possessed triple-filter respiratory membranes evolved for volcanic dust worlds. Varnic cadets were famous for enduring hostile air longer than most battlefield medics could remain conscious. Yet now, his chest expanded unevenly, one side rising before the other. Mara noticed, but did not acknowledge it. Inhale, 4 counts. Hold. The room obeyed more carefully now. Release. The Keth cadet nearest the rear wall opened his neck vents wider than before, trying to compensate for the slight pressure imbalance. That species relied heavily on secondary exchange sacs hidden along the collarbone. Under stress, they overcorrected instinctively, wasting oxygen instead of preserving it. A mistake invisible in ordinary drills. A fatal weakness in collapsing environments. Mara already knew this. She had spent 3 weeks reading cross-species battlefield collapse reports before entering Chamber 7. The Academy had expected her to teach breathing. She had come to demonstrate prediction. Torvak frowned harder. His first arrogance had vanished. The Duran were built for force, not subtle control. Dense thoracic muscle allowed short bursts of tremendous output, but that same density punished inefficient breathing once rhythm fractured. His nostrils widened. One hand left his knee. "Lieutenant," he said, voice lower now. "What exactly did you alter?" Mara did not stop counting. 1, 2, 3, 4. Then she answered, "Nothing dangerous." That answer disturbed them more than a warning would have, because every species in the room could now feel the same truth. Their bodies were spending more effort than the humans standing in the center. Rest tried to hide a swallow. Too late. Mara saw it. So did the instructors behind the glass. The senior observer touched the environmental panel and read the values twice. Atmospheric oxygen had indeed changed by less than 2%. Humidity had dropped fractionally. Pressure had shifted only enough to punish unstable rhythm. No toxins, no gas, no hidden sedatives, just ordinary air adjusted to expose inefficiency. And the human officer stood inside it, breathing like she could remain there all day. Cycle 9. The first audible mistake came from the far left side of the chamber, a sharp intake. Too early. Cadet Selk youngest of the Marathi delegation, blinked rapidly and pressed fingers against his own throat. Marathi lungs were elegant structures designed for thin moons and rapid ascent, but they reacted poorly when carbon balance drifted unexpectedly. His body was now trying to accelerate beyond instruction. "Stay with the count," Mara said. Selk tried, failed. His next inhale came too fast again. A warning light flickered once above his station. Several cadets noticed and immediately tried to control themselves harder. That made it worse, because forced control without rhythm created visible strain. Torvak's shoulders tightened. Res leaned forward slightly. The Keth cadet's neck vents fluttered in rapid bursts now, losing precision entirely. Mara finally moved, just one slow step across the circle, no urgency, no authority display, only observation. "Most species," she said calmly, "mistake oxygen abundance for respiratory mastery." No one laughed now. Humans learned long ago that breathing is not merely intake. It is timing under pressure. Another cycle. A second cadet made a mistake. This time, one of the smaller Veyran collapsed backward against the floor, not unconscious yet, but stunned by dizziness. The chamber alarm gave one soft pulse. Observation glass brightened instantly. Medical staff behind the outer corridor straightened, but did not enter, because no emergency threshold had been reached. Yet, Torvak now looked openly angry, which Mara expected. The strongest cadets often became angry first when control slipped. "You manipulated us before instruction." "No," Mara said. "I gave you instruction before you believed it mattered." That sentence landed harder than the atmospheric pressure. Even Res looked at her directly now, because suddenly the lesson was no longer ridiculous. It was becoming personal. Cycle 10. Selk lost rhythm entirely. His hands went flat to the floor. One of his secondary pupils contracted sharply. Then he tipped sideways. The chamber alarm rose a second level. Medical override lights appeared along the wall. Still, Mara did not stop the timer. 2 minutes and 12 seconds had passed. Outside the chamber, the senior instructor whispered something none of the cadets could hear. "She timed it exactly." The junior observer beside him stared at the monitor. "How?" The senior instructor did not answer. Inside the room, Torvak tried to stand. Bad decision. His body had accumulated enough imbalance that vertical movement broke his center of gravity immediately. He rose halfway, then caught himself against one knee. Several cadets stared, because Torvak was never unstable. Never. Mara looked directly at him. "Sit." This time it was not instruction, it was mercy. He hesitated, then obeyed, and that obedience changed the room more than any collapse so far. Because once the strongest cadet obeyed without argument, every remaining species understood, something they had resisted since she entered. The human had known exactly when each body would begin failing. Cycle 11. Res exhaled too late. The Keth cadet coughed sharply through his vents. A third warning tone appeared overhead, and the chamber timer continued toward the final minute. The final minute began with the sound no cadet in Chamber 7 expected to hear from themselves. Fear entering the breath. Not panic yet, not full loss of control, but that thin, invisible hesitation between inhale and exhale when the body realizes instinct is no longer trustworthy. Mara heard it immediately. Across 32 cadets, 6 species, every respiratory pattern now carried tiny fractures. Some held too long, some released too fast. Some tried correcting with force, which only accelerated imbalance. And because fear altered rhythm faster than pressure ever could, the chamber became a laboratory of visible collapse. "Again," Mara said. Her own voice remained almost soft. No strain, no raised pulse. Nothing in her posture suggested the atmosphere had changed at all. That detail disturbed them more than their own symptoms. Res now kept one hand against his ribs. The plated segments along his chest no longer expanded evenly. Varnic physiology depended on pressure sequencing between layered membranes. Once rhythm broke, each breath demanded conscious correction. For the first time in academy training, he looked uncertain of his own body. Torvak's jaw locked hard enough that the muscles along his neck trembled. He had regained posture, but not control. Sweat, rare for his species, had begun forming near the temples. The Keth cadet near the rear wall suddenly coughed again, this time harder, neck vents fluttering in disorganized bursts. A red diagnostic line appeared above him. "Carbon imbalance," whispered one observer behind the glass. Another answered quietly, "Impossible this quickly." "No," said the senior instructor, "only if they never learned regulation." That sentence remained behind the glass. Inside the chamber, Mara continued. Inhale, 4 counts. Hold. 3 cadets now failed the hold. Release. 2 released too violently. Selk, still on the floor, had regained consciousness enough to stare upward in disbelief. He was not injured, not poisoned, not harmed in any conventional way. His own body had simply spent years operating efficiently only under familiar instinct. And now a human had shown him that instinct collapsed faster than discipline. One cadet from the far right sector, Marathi, tall, silver-eyed, attempted a hidden workaround by accelerating micro-breaths between counts. Mara noticed immediately. "Stop cheating!" The cadet froze. Several others looked up, because she had not even turned toward him. "How did you lifted your left shoulder on count 3. That answer silenced even the remaining whispers. She was not merely teaching breathing, she was reading bodies. Torvak finally said what several were thinking. "This is not respiratory training." Mara nodded once. "No, this is command survival." The timer displayed 52 seconds. The chamber atmosphere shifted 1 fractional degree lower, tiny, barely measurable. Yet the effect across unstable bodies was immediate. Ress bent forward fully now. The Keth cadet beside the wall lost balance and hit one palm against the floor. A 4th cadet collapsed backward. Medical alarms brightened. Still no intervention. The senior observer behind the glass folded his arms. He knew why Command had authorized this session now. Every species in interstellar combat prepared for pressure, toxins, gravity, pain, weapon noise, blood loss. Almost none prepared for the moment. Internal rhythm failed first. Humans did. Not because humans were physically superior, because humans had turned weakness into routine. Mara looked toward the observation glass briefly, then back to the cadets. Earth military pilots train this before atmospheric failure. No answer. Divers train it before blackwater entry. A cadet coughed. Snipers train it before trigger control. Torvak stared at her. Medics train it before triage under blood loss. Ress shut his eyes briefly, trying to recover count. The Keth cadet's vents slowed at last as he finally matched rhythm instead of fighting it. That was the first visible recovery in the room. Mara noticed and pointed. "Him! Watch him!" Several cadets turned. He stopped resisting the count. Another cycle. For the first time, 5 cadets matched correctly. Not because they understood, because survival had finally made listening efficient. 30 seconds remained. Selk pushed himself upright slowly, his breathing still unstable but improving. Torvak now inhaled deeper, slower. Ress corrected shoulder tension. The chamber changed again, not physically this time, but socially. The mockery had fully vanished. No one now saw the human officer as entertainment. They were measuring her the way cadets measure dangerous instructors, quietly, while hoping she does not notice. The timer reached 20 seconds. Mara stepped closer to the center. Most battle deaths begin before injury. No one moved. Bodies fail command before wounds appear. 10 seconds. Fear starts in breath. 5. And disciplined breath delays fear long enough for thought to survive. The timer hit 0. A sharp tone sounded. Atmospheric settings returned instantly to baseline. Several cadets inhaled hard, as though surfacing from deep water. 2 fell sideways anyway, muscles failing after delayed strain. 1 medical hatch opened automatically. White lights returned overhead. For a full 5 seconds, nobody spoke. Then Torvak looked up, breathing hard, and asked the question that changed the entire room. How long could humans continue? Mara picked up the timer. long enough to keep giving orders. No one laughed, not one. Outside the chamber, the senior instructor pressed a silent command into his tablet. Across the Academy internal network, Chamber 7's lesson was immediately reclassified from elective conditioning to mandatory command doctrine. And Mara Levin, who had entered carrying only a timer, had just become the most discussed officer in the Academy before the session had even officially ended. The lesson should have ended there. Protocol said once medical alarms triggered and the chamber returned to baseline, cadets were dismissed, evaluated, and reassigned before the next training block. Under ordinary Academy procedure, no instructor continued after visible collapse. But Chamber 7 no longer felt ordinary, because something subtle had shifted during those final seconds. Humiliation had become curiosity, and curiosity inside military academies was often more dangerous than resistance. The medical hatch remained open. 2 medics entered, checked Selk and the fallen Veyran, confirmed neither required extraction, then stepped back out without speaking. Even they looked at Mara differently now. Torvak remained seated longer than necessary. That alone drew attention. A Duran cadet rising slowly was not unusual. A Duran cadet staying still after challenge meant he was thinking. Res straightened carefully, chest plates settling back into proper sequence. The Keith cadet rolled his shoulders and deliberately closed his neck vents, testing whether rhythm held without visible compensation. It did, barely. Mara placed the timer back on the floor. No speech, no dismissal, just silence. That silence forced Torvak to speak first. What happens under combat pulse? A few cadets turned toward him. The question had changed shape. No sarcasm now, no challenge. It was technical. Mara looked at him. Which combat pulse? Weapon concussion. Depends who fires first. A few cadets almost smiled, but no one interrupted. Torvak continued. If oxygen drops while moving, then movement becomes secondary. Res frowned. That contradicts every assault doctrine. It contradicts every assault doctrine written by species who panic before they measure internal failure. That answer hit harder than before, because now no one could dismiss it. The senior observer behind the glass muted his channel and began recording manually. He had seen hundreds of cross-species lessons. Very few survived the first collapse and became doctrine discussions inside the same room. Mara walked slowly across the chamber, stopping beside the wall display. She touched one command. Immediately, the room projected a battlefield image, not alien, human, dust, collapsed concrete, night, partial fire, low visibility. Several cadets recognized the setting as one of Earth's old urban war archives. A ruined street, broken walls, a medic dragging someone with one arm while giving hand signals with the other. The footage had no sound, only visual telemetry. 6 minutes after detonation, Mara said. The image zoomed. The medic's chest movement became visible, controlled, regular, even while running. The blast reduced air density in 3 sectors, she continued. 2 soldiers survived because one medic kept their breathing synchronized while moving. Res narrowed his eyes. He counted under fire. He counted under blood loss. The projection changed. Another image, a diver inside black water under fractured ice. Pulse monitor visible. No panic. Steady rhythm. 8 minutes trapped under surface obstruction, Mara said. Human diver delayed oxygen panic by controlling exhale ratio. The Keth cadet asked quietly, "Why are these taught before command rank?" "Because command dies first when breathing becomes emotional." That line stayed in the chamber. No one looked away. Torvak stood now, fully stable again, not aggressive, measured. "Run the chamber again." Several cadets looked at him immediately. That request carried weight. Mara studied him. "Why?" His answer came without delay. "Because now I want to know where collapse begins." That was the exact sentence she had hoped someone would eventually say. Not because it meant success, because it meant the room had crossed from humiliation into ownership. Res added quietly, "Without atmosphere adjustment." The senior observer behind the glass raised one eyebrow. Interesting. Mara touched the panel again. This time, Chamber 7 stayed at baseline. No pressure shift, no oxygen variation. Ordinary academy air. Same count, she said. They sat faster this time. No mockery, no delay. Even the cadets who had collapsed returned to position. 32 bodies, now listening. Timer reset, 3 minutes. Inhale. The first cycle was cleaner immediately. Not perfect, but disciplined enough that differences became visible. Without environmental stress, species habits emerged clearly. Torvak inhaled too aggressively at first, then corrected by second cycle. Res held too long, trying to dominate the count rather than merge with it. The Keth cadet nearly repeated vent compensation, caught himself, then stabilized. Selk trembled once, likely from embarrassment rather than physiology. Mara watched all of it. This time she moved behind them while counting. Slow circles, like an officer inspecting formation. At cycle 4, she stopped behind Torvak. Shoulders. He relaxed them instantly. Behind Res, jaw. He unclenched. Behind Selk, stop preparing for failure. That one made Selk blink, because he realized he had been anticipating collapse before each inhale. Outside the chamber, the junior observer whispered, "They're learning faster now." Dude, the senior instructor, did not answer immediately. He watched Mara instead, then finally said, "No, they're learning because she made failure visible before teaching correction." Inside the room, the final minute arrived again. But this time, no alarm sounded. No cadet lost balance, no warning lights triggered. Only 32 bodies discovering that breathing, once treated as automatic, had suddenly become measurable skill. When the timer ended, Mara looked around the chamber and gave the first approval of the session. Better, only one word. Yet every cadet received it like formal recognition. Then Res asked the question none of them had expected themselves to ask an hour earlier. What does Earth teach after breathing? And for the first time since entering Chamber 7, Mara smiled. Pain. No one answered immediately, not because they had not heard her. Because the word landed differently inside Chamber 7 after everything that had already happened. Pain. Simple. Short. But now every cadet in the room understood that when humans used simple words in training, complexity usually followed. Torvak crossed his arms again, though without the arrogance he had carried at the beginning. Physical pain? Mara looked at him. Not first. That answer created another silence. Res tilted his head slightly. The Keth cadets' vents remained closed now, disciplined enough not to flutter unnecessarily. Selk had fully recovered posture, though he still looked determined never to collapse publicly again. Mara touched the wall display once more. The battlefield footage vanished. A new projection appeared. A cockpit, human pilot, warning lights everywhere. Altitude unstable, one engine burning, the pilot's pulse monitor visible in one corner. Too high, then dropping, controlled deliberately. 3 years ago, Mara said, this pilot lost one engine during atmospheric descent over frozen ocean. The image zoomed tighter, hands steady on controls, jaw tight, breathing visible only because the chest restraint moved rhythmically. He had 27 seconds before stall. Torvak narrowed his eyes. He survived. He landed. How? He stopped listening to panic before panic reached his hands. The projection froze, then shifted again. A hospital room, human surgeon, blood across gloves, 3 monitors screaming alarms. Yet the surgeon's shoulders remained still, regular breath. Human trauma surgery, Mara continued, requires breath discipline before hand precision. Res spoke quietly now, because shaking begins in lungs. Mara looked at him once, a small acknowledgement. Yes, that single word visibly affected him more than the earlier approval had, because Res understood he had just answered correctly inside a human lesson. The senior observer behind the glass noticed it too. A Varnic cadet accepting correction publicly without resistance was rarer than collapse itself. Mara dimmed the room further. Not darkness, just enough that all attention shifted towards sound. Close your eyes. No one hesitated now. 32 cadets obeyed. Even Torvak, even Res, even the species that minutes earlier had laughed openly. Pain begins early, Mara said, her voice lower now, steady enough that every species could track it. Not when tissue tears, not when blood appears, not when bone fails. It begins when the body predicts what may hurt. A few cadets adjusted posture unconsciously. She heard every movement. That prediction alters breathing before thought catches up. The chamber speakers activated. A low battlefield frequency emerged. Distant impact sounds, metal strain, emergency alarms. Nothing violent enough to startle, just enough noise to disturb concentration. Immediately, 3 cadets changed rhythm. Mara kept counting. Inhale, 4 counts. Hold. A nearby metallic strike sounded through the speakers. Res almost reacted, caught himself. Release. Another sound. Closer. The Keth cadet's shoulders twitched once. Torvak kept rhythm this time. Good. Mara increased the volume slightly, then added another layer, human heartbeat. Slow, measured, almost hidden under the noise. Pain, she said, is often noise arriving before injury. Cycle 2, a sharper alarm. Selk flinched, recovered. Cycle 3, a simulated scream from distant archive footage. 2 cadets lost count. Mara corrected instantly. Return. They did. No collapse this time, but effort showed everywhere, because now the room understood something even less comfortable than respiratory weakness. The body prepared for suffering, even when suffering had not arrived. Outside the chamber, the junior observer whispered, "She's teaching anticipation." The senior instructor answered quietly, "She's teaching command under biological betrayal." Inside, the soundscape intensified. Weapon concussion, metal tearing, impact pulse. Yet Mara's voice remained unchanged. 1, 2, 3, 4. Torvak's jaw tightened but held. Res corrected earlier than before. The Keth cadet finally matched perfectly through 2 full cycles. Then Mara stopped counting. Silence. Absolute silence. The sudden absence of sound hit harder than the noise itself. No cadet moved, because now each one could hear their own breathing clearly, and that, unexpectedly, felt louder than battle. Mara let the silence remain for several seconds, then asked, "What did you hear first when the noise increased?" Res answered first. "My own chest." "Good." Torvak answered second. "The instinct to rush." "Good." Selk, still embarrassed but determined, answered third. "The fear of losing count." Mara nodded. "Also good." Then she gave them the final lesson command none of them expected. "Stand." 32 cadets rose. No hesitation. "Hold your breath." That caused visible surprise again. But only surprise. No laughter, no mockery. They obeyed. Mara walked slowly between them. "Command decisions," she said, "are often made in the half-second before breath returns." She stopped in front of Torvak. He held steady. In front of Res. Still steady. At exactly 12 seconds, Selk broke first and inhaled sharply. At 15, 2 Mirathi cadets followed. At 18, the Keth cadet released. Torvak reached 21, Res 22. Mara raised one finger. Notice who panicked before air was actually needed. That line landed harder than all previous corrections, because every cadet knew instantly whether they had lost to physiology or fear. She finally allowed them to breathe normally, then picked up the timer again. The chamber lights returned fully. For the first time since entering, she looked at all of them not as cadets under correction, but as officers still unfinished. "Tomorrow," she said calmly, "we do this while running." A low reaction crossed the room, half disbelief, half immediate calculation. No one laughed, not even Torvak, especially not Torvak. Because now every cadet understood what had changed during one lesson that began as a joke. They had entered Chamber 7 believing breathing belonged to biology. They were leaving knowing Earth treated it as weapon control. And long after Mara Levin exited, carrying only the same steel timer she had entered with, cadets remained standing in silence, breathing more carefully than any academy instructor had ever seen. Outside the chamber, Command had already scheduled her next lesson for triple attendance, no longer optional, no longer elective, mandatory across 6 species. Because somewhere above academy level, someone had realized the same truth the cadets now understood. Humans had survived impossible battlefields, partly because they learned to command the body before commanding war.